I remember the sound before anything else. Not a scream, not footsteps, just a quiet crackle of a dying campfire somewhere deep in the woods. The kind of fire that glows more than it burns, soft orange light breathing against the dark like it's alive. I had walked farther than I meant to that night. The trail disappeared behind me without warning, swallowed by fog that rolled between the trees like slow-moving water. The forest felt older than it should have. Every branch hung still. No wind, no insects. Even my own breathing sounded wrong, too loud in a place that demanded silence. I sat near the fire someone else had built, though I never saw who made it. A circle of stones. Fresh ash. A backpack resting against a log, damp with dew. Whoever owned it couldn't have gone far. That's what I told myself. Somewhere behind me, leaves rustled, not like an animal moving through brush, but like someone carefully stepping where I had stepped minutes earlier. I didn't turn around. The fire popped softly. Sparks lifted into the dark and vanished before reaching the branches. And for a moment, I felt certain the woods were listening, waiting for me to remember something I had forgotten. That was the first night I understood why people tell campfire stories. Because sometimes the stories aren't meant to scare you. Sometimes they're warnings left behind by people who never made a home. And when the fire dimmed, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. That's when I saw it. I stepped off the marked trail just before sunset. The forest looked harmless then. Late autumn light slipping through tall pine branches. Dry leaves soft beneath my boots. The air smelled like cold soil and distant rain. I wasn't trying to get lost. I only want a quieter place to camp, somewhere without other hikers, without distant laughter or phone screens glowing through the dark. The deeper I walked, the quieter everything became. Even the birds faded first, then the insects, then the wind. Only my breathing remained, slow and visible in pale air. That's when I saw the fire. It waited in a small clearing ahead of me, already burning. Not dying, not freshly lit, just steady. Orange light flickered against surrounding trees, painting long shadows that swayed like slow water. A circle of stones held the flames neatly in place. Logs were stacked beside it, dry, clean, arranged too carefully to be abandoned. Someone had prepared this campsite perfectly, but no one was there. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time, listening. No footsteps retreating, no rustling packs, no human movement at all. Only the gentle crackle of wood folding into ash. The warmth reached me before I stepped closer. Real warmth. Recent warmth. Whoever built it couldn't have been gone long. I called out once. My voice felt small. The trees absorbed it without reply. The backpack beside the fire was missing. No tent, no food, no gear at all. Just the fire itself, waiting patiently like a host expecting company. I told myself another hiker must be nearby, maybe gathering water, maybe walking the perimeter. That explanation held together just long enough for me to sit down. The heat felt comforting against the growing cold. Smoke drifted upward in a thin line, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and something older, like damp wool left too long in storage. I noticed the footprints then. They circled the campsite in a wide ring, dozens of impressions pressed into the dirt. Boot prints, all facing inward toward the fire. I stood slowly, scanning the clearing. The tracks formed a complete circle, careful, repeated steps walking around and around the flames. But none of them led away into the forest. They simply ended where they began. No entry, no exit, just endless circling. A chill moved through me despite the warmth at my knees. I checked the surrounding ground again, hoping I had missed something. Nothing. The forest beyond the circle remained untouched. Smooth leaves, unbroken soil, silence pressing against my ears. I should have left then. Instead, I added my pack beside the fire. Darkness arrived quickly after that. The sky dimmed from gray to deep blue, then black. Trees blended together until the world existed only as firelight and shadow. The flames hummed softly, steady and calm, as if they knew exactly how long they needed to burn. I watched them longer than I meant to. Time felt slow there, heavy. At some point, exhaustion pulled at my eyes. I leaned back against a log, letting the warmth settle into my bones. The forest stayed unnaturally still. No owls, no branches snapping, no distant animals moving through brush. Just fire and breathing, mine, and something else I almost imagined beside it. A soft shift broke the silence. I opened my eyes. One of the stacked logs beside the fire rolled forward. Slowly, deliberately, it tipped over the stones and slid into flames. Sparks lifted into the air like startled insects. I froze. No wind touched the clearing. The other logs remained perfectly stacked. The ground hadn't shifted beneath me, yet the new piece would settle perfectly into place, feeding the fire exactly when it began to fade. The flames brightened again, alive, maintained. My throat felt dry. I waited for movement in the trees, for footsteps, for someone returning to claim the fire. Nothing came. Minutes passed, then an hour. The fire burned steadily without needing me. I realized something slowly, the way realization sometimes arrives without permission. The fire wasn't abandoned. It was being kept ready, not for the person who built it, for the person who arrived. For me, I looked again at the ring of footprints surrounding the clearing. In the shifting light, they no longer felt random. They felt patient, like watchers who once stood exactly where I now stood, facing inward, waiting their turn beside the flames. The air grew colder beyond the firelight. The darkness between the trees thickened, almost solid, and for the first time I noticed something missing. There were many footprints around the fire, but only one fresh set leading into the clearing. Mine. I stood quickly, heart beating louder than the crackling wood. Shadows stretched longer as I stepped backward. The warmth faded instantly once I left the circle of stones. Behind me, the forest felt safer despite the dark. Ahead of me, the fire continued burning, unbothered, certain. As I turned to leave, another log shifted behind me. It rolled gently into the flames, as if reminding me the fire would stay lit, however long it needed, however many nights passed, waiting for whoever was expected next. I didn't look back again, but even now when I close my eyes at night, I still see that clearing, still feel that warmth on my hands. And sometimes just before sleep takes me, I wonder the fire is still burning, or if someone else is sitting beside it now, realizing they were never the one who found the campsite. They were the one it was waiting for. I chose a different campsite the next night, farther from the trail, farther from people, farther from the memory of that fire that had burned without an owner. The forest here felt ordinary again. Wind moved through branches with a soft whisper. Insects hummed somewhere near the ground. A small stream moved nearby, water slipping over stones like quiet breathing. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. I pitched my tent just before dark and built my own fire this time. I watched every spark rise, watched every log settle, made sure the flames belonged to me. The orange light pushed back the night in a small circle. Beyond it, trees waited patiently. I ate slowly, listening to the forest settle into evening. The sky dimmed. Cold crept down from the hills. The fire cracked softly, steady and familiar. Nothing felt wrong. Until midnight. I didn't check the time. I just felt it, the moment when the forest grows heavier, when even the wind seems to pause. That's when I heard voices, faint at first, somewhere beyond the trees. More than one person speaking quietly, like a group gathered around another campsite. Low tones drifting through branches. Calm conversation carried on invisible air. I smiled without thinking. Other campers. Relief settled into me. I hadn't realized how alone I'd felt until that moment. The voices continued, slow, relaxed, almost comforting. Someone laughed softly. Another person answered. I couldn't make out words yet, only rhythm. The rise and fall of conversation. Storytelling voices shared between strangers in the dark. But something felt strange. There was no light, no flicker between the trees, no glow from lanterns or fire, only darkness. I stood, stepping closer to the edge of my campsite. The voices grew clearer, and then I understood the problem. I recognized one of them. It was mine, not exactly my voice, but close enough that my stomach tightened. The tone matched, the cadence, The small pauses I made when thinking. The voice said a sentence I had spoken earlier that afternoon, while hiking, word for word. I stopped breathing. Another voice repeated something else I remembered saying, a quiet comment about the cold air, spoken hours earlier when no one had been near me. The conversation continued, built entirely from pieces of my own words, fragments of things I had said throughout the day, replayed, shared, passed between unseen speakers. I listened carefully. There were at least 4 voices now, each one calm, each one repeating moments from my day like storytellers recounting memories. The forest itself seemed to lean closer. Branches creaked softly overhead. Leaves rustled without wind. The darkness pressed against my vision until the fire behind me felt very small. I called out, "Hello." The voices stopped instantly. Silence fell so fast it felt physical. No movement followed. No retreating footsteps. No response at all. Just the steady crackle of my fire. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into the trees, waiting for shapes to appear. Nothing came. Eventually, I returned to fire and sat down. But I didn't relax. The voices resumed minutes later. Quieter now. Closer. They repeated newer things. Sentences I had whispered to myself while listening. Thoughts I was certain I had never spoken aloud. My breath felt loud in my ears. I climbed into my tent and zipped it closed carefully. The voices circled somewhere beyond the thin fabric walls. Not moving fast. Not hunting. Just walking slowly, as if sharing stories around an invisible fire. At one point, a voice near the entrance whispered my name. Softly, kindly. I covered my ears, but the murmurs continued underneath the silence, threading through memory and imagination until sleep finally pulled me under. Morning arrived gently. Sunlight filtered through the tent walls, pale and harmless. Birds returned. Wind moved again. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I stepped outside. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving warm gray ash behind. Dew covered the grass. My campsite looked untouched. At first, then I noticed the footprints. One extra set. They circled my tent slowly, evenly spaced, walking the same path over and over. The impressions were deep, clear in the soft soil. They never approached the fire, never moved away into the forest, just circled where I had slept. I followed the tracks carefully. They completed a perfect ring, and then they stopped. No entrance, no exit, only presence. The same pattern I had seen before. A quiet understanding settled over me then. The voices hadn't belonged to campers. They had been listeners, collecting stories, repeating them, keeping them alive somehow. I packed my gear quickly after that. As I left the clearing, the forest sounded normal again. Birds calling, branches swaying, distant water moving. But once, just once, I thought I heard faint conversation behind me, my voice among them, telling a story I didn't remember finishing. And even now, sometimes when I speak alone outdoors, I lower my voice without meaning to, because part of me believes the trees are still listening, waiting for new words to carry into the dark, waiting for the next story to begin. The trail looked simple on the map. A short afternoon hike through dense forest, looping around a ridge before reconnecting with the main path. Easy terrain, clear markers, nothing unusual. I started just after lunch. Sunlight filtered through tall pines, leaving shifting patterns on the ground. The air smelled clean, damp leaves and moss warming under soft light. My boots pressed quietly into soil that felt untouched for years. It felt peaceful, grounded, the kind of trail that helps you forget everything beyond the trees. The first hour passed without incident. I crossed a narrow stream, stepped over fallen logs, followed faded orange markers nailed to trunks at steady intervals. Birds moved overhead. Wind carried distant, rustling deeper in the forest. Then I reached a clearing, small, circular, surrounded by leaning trees. A flat stone rested in the center, pale against darker earth. I paused there to drink water, enjoying the stillness before continuing along the marked path opposite where I entered. Nothing strange yet, just forest. 30 minutes later, the trail opened again. The same clearing. I frowned. The same pale stone sat in the center. Same broken branch nearby. Same curved tree arching over the entrance. I assumed I had taken a wrong turn. The map suggested several crossing paths. It wasn't impossible to loop accidentally. I checked my compass, adjusted direction, and chose a different route leaving the clearing. The forest swallowed me again. Time passed. The air grew cooler. And then the clearing appeared for a third time. This time, something felt wrong immediately. The stone had shifted slightly. Only a few inches, but enough that I noticed. I approached slowly, scanning the ground. My own footprints crossed the dirt in multiple directions now. Fresh impressions layered over older ones. Proof I had been here more than twice. A tight feeling settled in my chest. I chose another path quickly, moving faster now. Branches brushed my arms. Leaves crunched louder beneath hurried steps. The forest seemed denser somehow, trees leaning closer together as if narrowing my options. I walked for nearly an hour. No turns, no pauses, just forward. When the clearing returned again, I stopped completely. Something new waited beside the stone. A backpack, old canvas, faded green, half buried under leaves. I was certain it hadn't been there before. The fabric looked worn by years of weather. Straps cracked, metal buckles dull with rust. Yet it rested upright, positioned carefully as a place rather than abandoned. I hesitated before touching it. The air felt heavier here, quieter. Even the wind refused to cross the clearing. Inside the backpack, I found supplies long expired. Empty wrappers, a corroded flashlight, a water bottle clouded with age, and a journal. The pages were yellowed but intact. Handwriting filled nearly every line. I sat on the stone and began to read. The early entries described a hiking trip. Ordinary observations about weather, terrain, and solitude. Then confusion appeared. The writer described returning repeatedly to the same clearing, trying different directions, walking faster, running, always ending up back at the stone. My hand grew cold as I turned pages faster. The entries became frantic but controlled. Someone trying to stay calm while documenting the impossible. Landmarks moving, trees changing shape, time feeling unreliable. The writer mentioned exhaustion, fear of sleeping, fear of never leaving. Near the end, the handwriting steadied again, almost peaceful. One final entry filled the last page. It read, "I think the trail brings someone new eventually. Today I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. I believe I'm about to see them." I stopped reading. Slowly, I lifted my head. The forest stood silent around me. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt certain someone had once sat exactly where I was sitting now, reading the same words, waiting for me to arrive. A breeze moved through the clearing at last, rustling leaves softly. I closed the journal and stood. When I turned toward the trail again, I hesitated, because no matter which direction I looked, every path seemed to lead back here. And somewhere behind me, deeper in the woods, I thought I heard footsteps beginning another approach. I stopped building large fires after that. Just enough flame to keep warm. Just enough light to see my hands. That evening, I camped near a ridge where the trees thinned slightly. The sky opened above me, deep blue fading into night. Cold air moved gently through dry grass, carrying the faint smell of pine sap and stone. I sat alone beside the fire, watching embers settle. The quiet felt heavier than usual. Not empty, occupied. I noticed a figure without seeing it arrive. One moment the space across the fire was empty. The next, someone sat there, perfectly still, a silhouette formed by shadow and faint light. I couldn't make out a face, only shape, knees bent, hands resting near the flames, posture relaxed like someone sharing warmth after a long walk. I didn't react immediately. My mind searched for simple explanations. Another camper, a late arrival, someone who approached quietly. But no footsteps had come. No branches moved. No greeting followed. The figure simply sat, watching the fire. I cleared my throat softly. No response. The flames shifted, briefly brightening, and for a moment I noticed something unsettling. The figure's movements matched mine. When I leaned forward slightly, it leaned forward too. When I rested my hands on my knees, it mirrored the motion with perfect timing. Not delayed, not imitated. Synchronized. My breathing slowed. I tested it carefully, lifting one hand toward the warmth. The silhouette did the same. The realization arrived slowly, like cold water spreading through cloth. It wasn't copying me. It already knew what I would do. I stood abruptly. The fire popped loudly. My shadow stretched long behind me. Across the flames, the figure remained seated, unmoving, still facing the fire, still shaped like me, but refusing to stand. A deep unease settled into my chest. If it were another person, they would react, speak, move, acknowledge me somehow. But this presence behaved differently. It continued sitting exactly where I had been moments earlier, as if one version of me had stayed behind. I stepped backward toward the edge of the light. The figure didn't turn, didn't watch me leave. It only stared into the fire, patient, calm, unmoving. The night air felt colder beyond the flames. The forest pressed close again, branches whispering faintly above. I waited in the darkness for several minutes, hoping the illusion would break. It didn't. Eventually exhaustion overcame fear. I circled wide around the clearing and returned to my tent without passing directly through the firelight again. Sleep came slowly, restless. When dawn finally arrived, pale light filled the clearing gently. Birdsong returned. Everything looked normal. I approached the fire carefully. Ash lay where the flames had burned. No one sat there. No second sleeping bag. No gear. No signs anyone else had ever been present. Only footprints remained. One set. Mine. They approached the fire, circled it once, and walked away toward my tent. There was no trace of anyone sitting across from me. Yet the opposite side of the fire showed a shallow depression in the dirt, shaped exactly like someone had rested there all night. I packed quickly after that. As I left, I felt an odd sensation linger. Not fear exactly, but absence, like leaving a conversation unfinished. Sometimes I think about that figure still sitting there after I walked away, still watching the flames, still waiting for me to return and take my place again. And sometimes, when I sit beside a fire now, I avoid looking directly across from me, because part of me worries. Someone might already be sitting there first. The lake appeared suddenly between the trees, wide, perfectly still, a sheet of dark glass reflecting the fading sky. I reached it near evening after a long day of walking. Mountains rose silently around the water, their shapes dissolving into fog that drifted low across the surface. It felt peaceful, safe. Other campers had mentioned the lake earlier on the trail. A quiet place, good for rest. But one detail kept returning in their conversations. The lantern. They spoke about it casually, almost joking. A light that appeared on the water at night. No one claimed to launch it anymore. I assumed it was a tradition someone had abandoned. That assumption lasted until midnight. I woke inside my tent without knowing why. The air felt colder, heavier. A faint glow pressed through the fabric walls. I unzipped the tent slowly. The lake held a single lantern floating near its center. Warm golden light swayed gently above the surface, reflected perfectly below. No ripples disturbed the water. No boat moved nearby. The lantern simply drifted, calm and deliberate. Fog wrapped around it like breath. I stepped closer to the shoreline. The forest behind me stayed silent. The lantern shifted slightly as I watched, not drifting randomly, moving, turning away from shore, as if aware of being observed. Curiosity pulled stronger than caution. A small wooden canoe rested nearby, half hidden among reeds. I hesitated only a moment before pushing it into the water and climbing inside. The lake accepted me quietly. No waves, no resistance. Each paddle stroke felt muted, swallowed instantly by the stillness. The lantern remained ahead, maintaining distance no matter how steadily I moved toward it. It neither approached nor fled, only adjusted, always just beyond reach. Mist brushed against my hands as I paddled deeper into the lake. The glow illuminated nothing beneath the surface, only blackness stretching downward without reflection. The air grew colder. The forest shoreline faded behind me. For a moment, I felt suspended between worlds. Then something moved beneath the boat. Not violently, just presence. A slow shadow sliding under the water, large enough to darken the faint reflections around me. I froze mid-stroke. The canoe rocked gently. The lantern drifted farther away. Below me, the water thickened with darkness. Another movement followed, slower this time, circling beneath the hull with patient precision. I held my breath. The lake remained silent. No splash, no disturbance. Only the quiet certainty that something below was aware of me. The lantern suddenly dimmed. Its glow flickered once, twice, then began drifting back toward shore. I didn't question it. I turned the canoe immediately, paddling faster now. Each movement felt heavy, urgent. Behind me, the water remained smooth, but I sensed a shadow keeping pace underneath. Following, guiding, the shoreline emerged slowly through fog. My fire appeared faintly among trees, a small promise of warmth. I pushed harder until the canoe scraped gently against sand. I stepped out quickly, dragging it onto shore. Only then did I turn back. The lantern floated near the center of the lake again, exactly where I first saw it. Calm, waiting. The water showed no sign of disturbance. No shadow, no movement at all. I stood there long after, watching the light sway against the darkness. Eventually it faded, not extinguished, just gone, as if someone had lowered it beneath the surface. I returned to my tent, but slept poorly. All night, I felt watched from the direction of the lake. Morning arrived bright and ordinary. Other campers passed along distant trails. Birds skimmed the water. Sunlight revealed nothing unusual. Yet near the shoreline, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Wet marks in the sand. Long, curved impressions leading from the water toward my campsite, stopping just short of my tent. No footprints, no clear shape, only smooth trails where something heavy had rested briefly before returning to the lake. I packed my things soon after. As I left, I looked back one last time. The water reflected the sky perfectly. Still, silent, but for a moment, just before the trees of the lake from view, I thought I saw a faint golden glow forming again near the center, waiting for night, waiting for someone curious enough to follow it. The storm arrived faster than expected. Clouds rolled over the mountains before sunset, swallowing the sky in heavy gray. Wind pressed through the trees in long breaths, bending branches until they creaked like old wood under strain. I hurried to secure my tent, fingers stiff from the sudden cold. Rain followed, not gentle rain. Sharp drops striking leaves and fabric with restless urgency. The forest darkened early, shadows blending into one endless wall beyond the firelight. I extinguished my fire before the wind could scatter sparks and retreated into the tent. Thunder moved somewhere distant, low and rolling. That's when I remembered the emergency radio. A small hand-crank model I carried for weather updates. I pulled it from my pack and turned the dial slowly. Static filled the small space immediately, a soft, endless as pressing against the quiet. I adjusted the frequency. More static. Then a voice broke through. Calm, clear, stay inside. I froze. The signal faded back into noise. I leaned closer, turning the dial again. Static thickened, rising and falling like breathing through fabric. The voice returned. Do not leave the tent. My chest tightened. It sounded official, measured, the tone of a ranger or emergency broadcast. I waited for more instructions, for mention of flooding or falling trees. Instead, silence returned. Thunder cracked closer now. Rain hammered the tent walls harder, water sliding in cold streams along the ground outside. Minutes passed. Then the radio spoke again. The branch will fall soon. I looked up instinctively. A loud crack split the forest overhead. Something heavy crashed nearby, shaking the ground. Leaves scattered across the tent roof. My breath caught. The radio hadn't warned about the storm. It had predicted it. I stared at the device, hands trembling slightly. Static whispered again. You're safe if you stay. Lightning flashed outside, turning the tent walls pale white for a heartbeat. Shadows of branches clawed across the fabric. The voice returned at uneven intervals, each message short, precise. Wind stronger in 2 minutes. Do not unzip the tent. Stay still. And every warning came true moments later. The storm intensified, exactly as described. Gusts slammed into the clearing. Something moved outside once, heavy footsteps pressing into soaked earth, but I forced myself not to look. The radio crackled louder. Its tone changed. Urgent now. Whatever you hear, do not come out. Rain softened suddenly. Too suddenly. The forest fell into an unnatural quiet between thunder rolls. Then came the sound of movement outside. Slow steps circling the tent. Wet soil compressing, underweight. I held my breath. The footsteps paused near the entrance. The zipper shifted slightly. Just a small movement, as if tested from the outside. My hand moved toward it instinctively. The radio burst with static, so loud it hurt. No. The voice spoke sharply for the first time. I pulled my hand away. The zipper stopped moving. The footsteps resumed, circling again, slower this time, patient, deliberate. Minutes stretched endlessly as the unseen presence completed loop after loop around my shelter. Eventually the storm returned in full force. Thunder swallowed the footsteps completely. At some point exhaustion took over, and I drifted into shallow sleep while rain continued to fall. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight warmed the tent walls. Birds called normally again. The storm had passed. I stepped outside cautiously. Branches littered the ground nearby, including one massive limb that had fallen exactly where the radio predicted. Relief washed through me until I noticed the marks. Deep gouges carved into the soil around my campsite. Not footprints, not claws exactly, but long scratches circling the tent in perfect loops, cutting through mud and grass alike. They stopped inches from the entrance. I turned back toward the tent. The radio sat silent. No static, no signal. No matter how much I adjusted the dial, it never worked again. Even now, I keep it packed away. Because sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had opened the zipper before the voice told me not to. I found the clearing by accident. A wide open space surrounded by tall trees, soft grass covering the ground like a faded carpet. It looked inviting after a long day of walking, flat, sheltered, perfect for rest. Nothing felt wrong at first. The silence only became noticeable after I set up camp. No insects buzzed nearby. No birds moved overhead. Even the wind seemed to stop at the edge of the clearing, branches beyond swaying while those above me remained perfectly still. It felt sealed. I built a small fire anyway. The flames burned normally, yet the crackling sounded muted, as if wrapped in thick cloth. Every movement I made felt heavier. My breathing echoed softly inside my own head. The absence of sound pressed against me. Sleep came quickly, too quickly. A heavy exhaustion settled into my limbs, pulling me down before I finished watching the fire burn low. I woke suddenly during the night. I couldn't move. My eyes opened, but my body refused to respond. The fire still glowed faintly nearby, casting weak orange light across the clearing. And beyond that light, shapes gathered, not fully visible, only darker sections of darkness, standing just outside the fire's reach. Tall outlines shifting slowly, forming and dissolving among the trees. They didn't approach. They waited, watching. My breath came shallow and slow. Panic tried to rise, but even fear felt dampened by the strange stillness surrounding me. One shape leaned closer. The fire dimmed. Another shape appeared behind it. More followed, forming a loose circle around the campsite. The silence deepened until it felt louder than any noise. Then, without warning, a gust of wind rushed through the clearing. Sound returned all at once. Leaves rattled. Insects chirped. The fire flared brightly again. My body jerked free, movement rushing back into my arms and legs. I sat up quickly, heart racing. The shapes were gone. Only trees remained. I didn't wait for morning. I packed immediately and left the clearing under starlight, walking until exhaustion forced me to stop elsewhere. When I finally turned back from a distance, I saw it clearly. The clearing remained silent, a perfect bubble where no sound entered. Even the forest seemed to avoid it. I never returned. Some places, I think, are meant only for quiet visitors, ones who never leave. The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow taps against my lantern. I opened my eyes, confused. No one should have been hiking that late. I unzipped the tent carefully. A A park ranger stood just beyond the light. His uniform looked old but clean, hat pulled low, flashlight resting in his hand, its beam aimed at the ground rather than my face. "Permit check," he said calmly. His voice sounded distant, almost hollow. I handed over my paperwork. He examined it briefly without stepping closer. Something felt strange immediately. The flashlight never illuminated his face. No matter how he shifted, the light avoided revealing his features completely. Only shadow remained beneath the brim of his hat. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I frowned. The trail had been open earlier that day. He shook his head slowly. "That path closed long ago." He pointed toward a direction behind my campsite, a narrow trail I had nearly followed earlier. "Don't take it tomorrow." I nodded, uneasy but grateful for warning. He returned my permit and turned away without another word. No footsteps followed. He simply faded into darkness between the trees. Morning curiosity pushed me to check my map. No closed trail appeared anywhere nearby. Later, at a ranger station miles away, I mentioned the encounter casually. The staff grew quiet. One ranger showed me an old photograph hanging on the wall. A man in uniform stood beside a patrol vehicle, smiling faintly. I recognized the posture instantly. It was him. The plaque beneath the photo explained he had died decades earlier while searching for missing hikers along a dangerous trail, the same direction he warned me about. I never questioned the encounter again. Some warnings don't need explanations, and sometimes protection arrives long after the person giving it is gone. The footsteps began after midnight, slow, measured, circling my tent. At first, I assumed it was an animal, something curious passing through camp. I stayed still, listening carefully. The steps continued, one full circle, then another, always the same distance from the tent walls. Too deliberate for wildlife. I held my breath. The ground shifted softly under each step, leaves compressing with patient rhythm. Whoever, or whatever, moved outside never rushed. It simply walked. The zipper trembled gently once. A small tug, then stillness. I stared at it, waiting for the entrance to open. It never did. Hours passed like that, circling, pausing, circling again. Eventually exhaustion dragged me into uneasy sleep. Morning sunlight woke me. The forest looked peaceful again. I stepped outside cautiously. Footprints surrounded the tent in a perfect ring. Clear impressions in the soil, stopping inches from the entrance. Only one set. No arrival. No departure. Then I noticed something new nearby. Another tent stood several yards away. Gray fabric identical to mine. I felt certain it hadn't been there the night before. I approached slowly. The zipper stood half open. Inside lay sleeping gear exactly like my own. Same brand, same color. Even the same small tear near the seam of the sleeping bag. It felt like stepping into a reflection. The air inside smelled faintly warm, recently used. But no one was there. I backed away slowly. When I turned again, my own campsite suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if I had wandered into someone else's memory. I packed quickly and left. I didn't look back to see whether both tents remained, because I wasn't sure which one belonged to me anymore. I found a fire already burning near an abandoned campsite. Blue flames flickered low inside a ring of blackened stones. No smoke rose from it. No warmth reached my hands when I stepped closer. Just light, cold, pale blue light. I assumed someone had left recently and tried to extinguish it responsibly. I poured water over flames. They didn't react. No hiss, no steam. The fire continued burning exactly the same. I kicked dirt across the coals. Nothing changed. The flames ignored every attempt to smother them. Other hikers passed nearby later that afternoon. None stopped. One woman glanced at the fire and immediately turned away, guiding her group along a wide detour. No one approached it. That night, I camped at a distance but kept watching the strange glow through the trees. Sleep came uneasy. I dreamed of strangers sitting around the blue fire, silent figures warming their hands despite the lack of heat. Their faces remained hidden, but their posture felt familiar, calm, patient. Waiting for stories to begin, I woke before sunrise. The glow had vanished. Only warm ashes remained inside the stones. Real warmth this time. Soft gray smoke drifted upward briefly before fading into morning air. There were no footprints nearby, no signs anyone had ever visited. I stood there for a long time, unsure whether the fire had ended or simply moved somewhere else. And sometimes, late at night, I imagined that cold blue flame still burning in another clearing, waiting for someone who doesn't yet realize they're meant to sit beside it. Late autumn settled quietly over the forest. The air held that thin cold that slips through fabric and rests against your ribs. I packed my bag before sunrise. Damp leaves clung to my boots. The fire behind me breathed its last pale smoke. I noticed the paper when I reached for my canteen, folded carefully, placed where I knew I hadn't left anything. The edges were worn, soft with age, as if carried for years. A map, hand-drawn, black ink lines curved through hills and trees I recognized. The trailhead, the creek bend, even my current campsite marked with a small circle. My breath fogged the paper. Someone had written words beside certain paths. Safe. Others were scratched darker. Do not go here. I listened, only wind moving through pine needles. A distant crow breaking the silence. No footprints near camp except mine. Still, the map felt familiar, like remembering something I hadn't lived yet. I followed the first marked safe path. The forest shifted immediately. Branches opened naturally. Ground stayed firm beneath my steps. No loose rock, no hidden roots. An hour later, I saw the first warning proven true. Off to my left, a slope marked danger on the paper. The earth suddenly collapsed there, sliding into a deep ravine hidden beneath leaves. Cold spread through my arms. The map knew. I kept walking. Each warning matched reality. A fallen tree blocking one trail, a flooded crossing, an area where the woods went unnaturally quiet, birds refusing to land. Every time the map steered me away, relief followed, but relief slowly turned into dread, because the ink guiding me forward never hesitated. It wanted me somewhere. Afternoon light faded into gray. The final path curved toward higher ground. At the top of the map, someone had drawn a small square. Beneath it, one word. Look out. I didn't remember a lookout tower in this forest. Yet my feet moved without resistance. The climb grew steep. Cold air sharpened. Wind hummed through bare branches like distant static. Then I saw it, an abandoned wooden tower rising above the trees, leaning slightly, boards pale with age. The ladder creaked when I climbed. Each step echoed too loudly in the empty air. At the top, the forest stretched endlessly beneath me, silent, waiting. Inside the tower walls were covered in carvings, names, dates, initials, visitors leaving proof they had existed. My fingers brushed one carving near the railing, fresh, cleaner than the others. I leaned closer. My breath stalled. It was my name, cut deep into the wood. Below it, a date from years before I had ever come here. The knife marks looked careful, familiar, as if I had carved them myself. Wind rushed through the tower. The map slipped from my hands and landed at my feet. The ink had changed. The path leading here faded slowly until nothing remained, only blank paper, as if the journey was complete. I stood there until dusk swallowed the horizon, trying to remember a visit that never happened, and wondering who had guided me, or who I had once been standing in the same place. Night settled early. Mist drifted between tents like slow breath. I sat near the fire watching embers pulse red and gold when footsteps approached through the dark. Soft, careful, a man stepped into the firelight, backpack dusty, clothes damp with dew. His face carried exhaustion deeper than travel. He looked at me immediately. "What time is it?" His voice sounded fragile. I checked my watch. 9:17. He smiled with visible relief, shoulders lowering. "Thank you." He walked away without another word. The forest swallowed him. I assumed he had found his camp, but an hour later he returned. Same careful steps, same pale expression. "What time is it?" The fire cracked quietly. 10:02. Again, relief washed over him, almost gratitude. He nodded and disappeared into the trees. Something uneasy settled in my chest. Near midnight, he came back. Fog clung to his jacket. Eyes darker now. What time is it? 11:48. His breath shook. He exhaled deeply as if escaping something unseen. I noticed then his wrist, a watch reflecting the firelight, its hands frozen. Exactly at midnight, 12 o'clock. Not moving. I almost mentioned it, but he had already turned away. I didn't see him again that night. Sleep came lightly. Branches rustled. Owls moved somewhere beyond camp. Just before dawn, I woke to footsteps again. He stood at the edge of the fading fire, face calm for the first time. What time is it? The sky held a pale blue hint of morning. 6:11. He closed his eyes, relief deeper than before, like someone finally allowed to rest. Good, he whispered. Then he walked toward the rising light. I expected to see him packing nearby later, but no tent stood where he'd gone. No tracks, only undisturbed grass shining with frost. At a nearby town store that afternoon, I mentioned the encounter casually. The cashier grew quiet. Years ago, she said, a camper vanished in these woods. Last seen asking strangers for the time. He disappeared exactly at midnight. Search teams never found him. Her words lingered as evening returned. I checked my watch instinctively. The second hand moved steadily. Alive, somewhere in the forest. Wind moved through branches, and for a moment, I thought I heard footsteps again, waiting for another answer. Every night the smoke appeared, thin gray ribbons rising from a distant ridge, always after sunset, always fading before dawn. The first night I ignored it. Campfires were common, but the second night curiosity pulled me closer. The climb felt wrong. Air grew colder despite the uphill effort. Pine needles muffled my steps. The smell reached me before the ridge. Burning wood, old ash. Yet when I arrived, nothing, no fire, no embers, only bare earth untouched by heat. I stood there breathing smoke that had no source. Wind shifted. The scent followed me back to camp. It clung to my clothes. My hair, even my hands carried faint gray dust. That night I dreamed. People gathered in a circle, faces blurred by darkness. They sat around flames I couldn't see. Light flickered across them anyway. Their mouths moved silently, arms extended toward warmth that wasn't there. I woke before dawn, ash coated my palms, fine powder slipping between my fingers. I brushed it away. It returned the next morning, and the next. Each night the smoke rose again. Each investigation found emptiness, yet the smell deepened. Sweet, heavy, ancient. Soon I noticed shapes moving inside the drifting smoke from my camp. Figures forming briefly, standing, watching, never fully present. Dreams grew clearer. I sat among them now, feeling heat without flame, hearing breath around me, though no one spoke. One figure turned toward me, its face almost mine. I woke gasping. Ash covered my sleeping bag. No fire nearby. No explanation. Only gray fingerprints across everything I touched. On the fourth night, I stopped climbing the ridge. I watched from afar instead. Smoke spiraled upward beneath the moon. Slow, patient, as if waiting for me to return. Morning came again. Ash rested quietly on my hands. Not falling, not blowing away, just remaining, proof of a fire that refused to exist. A new campsite appeared beside mine. I hadn't heard anyone arrive. Yet a tent stood between two trees, lantern glowing warm gold. A pot rested over a small stove, steam rising gently. Someone had been here moments ago. I called out. No answer, only leaves rustling overhead. The food remained warm when I touched the pot. Fresh, waiting. The lantern hummed softly. Its light felt welcoming, too welcoming. I noticed a sleeping bag near the tent entrance. It moved slightly, rising and falling, like steady breathing. I froze. The fabric lifted again. Someone inside. Hello? No reply, just the slow rhythm continuing. Carefully, I stepped closer. My own breath matched the movement unconsciously. The zipper felt cold beneath my fingers. I hesitated, then opened it. The bag lay empty. Flat, still warm. The breathing stopped instantly. Silence rushed in. Even the trees seemed to pause. I backed away slowly. Something about the space felt occupied despite the absence. That night, I returned to my own tent early. Fire burning low. Sleep resisted me. Every small movement outside felt intentional. Around midnight, pressure touched my sleeping bag. A gentle shift beside me, weight settling carefully. As if someone lay down without wanting to wake me. Warmth spread along my side. Breathing. Slow. Patient. I stared into darkness. Too afraid to move. The invisible presence adjusted slightly. Comfortable. Sharing my space. I listened to the forest until exhaustion finally took me. Morning arrived quietly. The neighboring campsite was gone. No tent. No lantern. No stove. Only flattened grass. And beside my sleeping bag, an impression where someone had rested through the night. The trail appeared under moonlight, invisible during the day. But once darkness settled, pale silver light revealed a narrow path behind my camp. I tested it cautiously. By morning it vanished again. Only leaves remained. That night curiosity won. I followed it. Moonlight guided each step. Trees leaned inward like silent witnesses. The air carried distant laughter. Soft, joyful. Firelight flickered ahead. A full campsite opened suddenly before me. Tents glowing warm orange. Figures gathered around a large fire. Dozens of people. Yet none spoke. They sat perfectly still. Faces turned toward the flames. I approached slowly. No one reacted. Their eyes reflected firelight, but held no life. Smoke drifted upward into stars. I felt neither welcome nor unwelcome, just unnoticed. A chair stood empty near the fire, waiting. I almost sat, but a cold breeze moved through camp. The laughter faded instantly. All figures turned their heads toward me at once. Silent recognition. Then darkness swallowed the fire. I stumbled backward. The path guided me home without thought. Morning sunlight revealed only burned ground where the camp had stood. Blackened earth. No footprints. No ashes warm enough to explain the night. And the trail, gone forever. I searched for it many nights after. Moonlight revealed nothing. The forest closed again, leaving only memory, and a strange longing for a place that existed only in darkness. Every evening it appeared, a dog standing just beyond the trees, still, watching, its fur pale against the shadows, eyes reflecting firelight gently. It never approached, never barked, only observed. At night, I heard movement circling camp. Soft paw steps pressing into leaves. Protective, patient, morning revealed tracks surrounding my tent. Perfect circles. As if guarding me while I slept, I began leaving food near the fire. Untouched each morning. The dog accepted nothing. Only presence mattered. Locals later told me about a search dog lost years ago. Disappeared during a rescue mission. Never found. That night, I thanked the darkness quietly. The dog stood closer than before. Tail still, calm. For the first time, I felt less alone. Days passed peacefully, until one morning the tracks changed. They led away from camp, straight into the forest. I followed. The prints stopped abruptly mid-trail. No turn, no struggle, just ended. The forest felt emptier afterward. That evening the tree line remained still. No watching figure, only fading firelight and distant wind. Comfort lingered, but sadness settled beside it, like a guardian finally released. I found the rain by accident. Sunlight warmed the forest everywhere except one small clearing. Rain fell there continuously, gentle silver drops forming a perfect circle. Outside it, dry earth, warm air. Inside, cold. I stepped beneath it. Water touched my skin like whispers. Voices hid within each drop, soft warnings brushing past my ears. Go home. Turn back. You stayed too long. I listened carefully. Words overlapped like distant memories trying to surface. The rain carried sadness more than threat, as if something cared enough to warn me. When I stepped out, silence returned immediately. Dry warmth replaced cold. I re-entered. The voices grew clearer. Urgent now. They spoke my name. Told me the forest changes those who listen too deeply. I stood still, breathing with the rhythm of falling water. The moment I focused completely, the rain stopped. Instantly, cloudless sky above, the clearing empty. No moisture remained, only lingering echoes inside my mind. Warnings I couldn't forget. He sat by the communal fire like he had always belonged there, a stranger with familiar posture. He greeted me by name before I introduced myself. Then he began telling stories. My stories, childhood memories, a broken swing behind my old house, a night I cried during a storm, details never spoken aloud. My chest tightened. How do you know this? He smiled gently. Campfires, he said, help memory survive, especially after people disappear. His words fell heavy, like truth spoken too softly. We talked until embers faded. He described events I had forgotten completely, or perhaps never lived. Before sunrise he stood, said goodbye like an old friend, gone before daylight touched the trees. Later that morning I found an old photograph in my pack. Faded edges, 2 children standing beside a campfire. One was unmistakably me. The other, him, taken decades earlier, long before I ever visited these woods. The cabin glowed warmly through thick trees, impossible to ignore, windows golden against the dark. Inside, chairs face a roaring fireplace. Logs burned brightly, yet no heat reached me. The air stayed cold. Dust covered everything except the chairs. Arranged carefully, waiting, a guest book rested on a small table. Entries filled every page. Dates continuing up to yesterday. Visitors describing peaceful stays. I flipped to the last page. My name already written there. Fresh ink. I didn't remember signing. Firelight flickered. For a moment I felt watched by unseen guests seated around me. I left quickly, but later I found soot on my hands. Proof I had lingered longer than memory allowed. The sky emptied suddenly. One moment filled with stars. The next, nothing. Blackness pressed downward like weight. Even insects stopped moving. The forest held its breath. Darkness felt alive. Something enormous moved overhead. No sound, only shifting absence. I sensed size beyond understanding. Time stretched unbearably. Then slowly, stars returned, one by one, but not where they belonged. Constellations slightly wrong, as if the sky had been rearranged. I watched until dawn, certain something had noticed me looking back. Firelight cast 2 shadows behind me, only one body. The second moved independently. It lifted an arm, pointed toward the trees. I ignored it. The fire shrank immediately. Cold crept closer. The shadow gestured again. Urgent. I followed its direction reluctantly. Moments later the ground vanished ahead. A hidden cliff edge. I stepped back just in time. Behind me the fire grew strong again. The second shadow merged with mine. Protective, silent, gone by morning. Other campers recognized me. They said I had told them a story the night before. A long tale around the fire. But I remembered silence. They described events that hadn't happened yet. A storm arriving. A lantern breaking. Someone leaving camp forever. Each detail unfolded exactly as described. Night mirrored the story. Reality catching up with words I never spoke. They asked how it ended. I couldn't answer, because the final event hadn't happened yet. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I was still living the unfinished ending. Years later I returned. Nothing had changed. Old campsites preserved perfectly. My abandoned chair still waiting. Objects resting exactly where I left them. Trees formed paths guiding me deeper, as if welcoming me home. Near a distant fire I saw someone sitting. Younger, familiar posture. Myself. The figure turned slightly, but vanished before I reached it. The forest felt aware, recognizing me, remembering every visit, every step, every story. I realized then I had never truly left. Night refused to end. Hours passed, then days. Watches stopped moving. Phones froze. Campers vanished quietly one by one. No struggle, no farewell, only empty tents. The fire became my only measured time. Its glow constant, reliable. Eventually I stopped waiting for sunrise, stopped checking the sky, Accepted darkness as permanent. The forest felt calmer once I did, like surrender was expected, like morning had never truly existed here. I sit beside the final fire now, deep in woods without a name. Every story echoes softly around me. The map, the stranger, the smoke, the shadow, footsteps circle beyond the light. Unseen listeners gathering, waiting. I understand at last. I am the storyteller now. The one travelers here in the distance. The voice guiding them deeper. Fire burns steadily, warm against endless night. Footsteps approach closer. More arrive every moment. I keep speaking quietly into the dark, because the fire must never go out. And somewhere beyond the trees, someone new has begun listening.